We are back for our third episode of the Flipwise Podcast. This is, I've done 2 weeks in a row, right, Michael? Is that right?
That is true. We did one of these at this time last week.
Yeah, this time last week. So we want to do them more frequently, and I think it's good for us to get together and talk about Flipwise things. And it sounds like from the feedback we're getting from our viewers and listeners that y'all like this too. So we're going to try to do more frequently. I think right now we have it on the schedule for every 2 weeks, and so we're going to do one today, and then we won't do another one for 2 weeks, and we're going to try to stick with that schedule every 2 weeks. So we'll see. Hopefully we can do that. But another thing I wanted to bring up is, Michael, I call you Michael on this podcast, which is weird to me because I've known you for so long and I've never, ever called you Michael. I always call you Lovett by your last name. I'm going to start calling you Lovett on this podcast. So is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Big change.
Big change, yeah. Look at that. 3 episodes in, we're already switching things up like this. We've had a busy week. So we talked last week about some of the big releases that we had, and that's kind of that's how our like development cycle has gone on Flipwise, is sort of dig deep on a big project that takes many weeks, sometimes even longer than that. And then we release it, and then we sort of come back and, do some smaller projects, do some cleanup, things like that. So this past week has been kind of that, right? We did some smaller projects this past week. What did we actually work on this past week?
Yeah, that's right. We did a variety of things. We had some issues with scheduled listings,
Yes.
and how Flipwise wasn't kind of reflecting changes to those.
Yep.
What else did we do? Oh, we had some currency issues with international users that we worked through.
Yep.
Some other stuff too. What else did we do? I can't think of it now.
Yeah, there's a storage location bug that we fixed. We also did some relist work, which I know we want to talk about in detail. That's right. That's like what was it? So Flipwise is available in many countries, so it's not just US based. We also have users from Canada, the UK, and Australia as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember if we had more than that. I think that's right. But that, so we do deal with different currencies depending on the store that you sell, the eBay location that you sell. But it's more complex than that. Can you explain why it's more complex than that and how we're dealing with different currencies?
Yeah, it is more complex than that. I think the one thing that we knew we would need to do when we started supporting folks outside the U.S. was just kind of respect the currency that they were using in their eBay account. So if you're in the UK, you're using British pounds. If you're in Australia, you're using Australian dollars. And so we need to make sure that we're kind of like, when we're ingesting kind of like financial amounts from eBay, they actually tell us, hey, you sold this thing for $19.99 and that was in US dollars. So we knew that, okay, we got to ingest all the currency information and make sure that we're, all of our UK users were kind of marking all of their amounts as pounds and so on. So that was all kind of expected. What was kind of more unexpected is that, I guess I still feel like we don't have a full sense of all the different scenarios and complexities here. Like, we can only test so much. We're not actually allowed to create eBay accounts outside the US. We tried in Canada. We were immediately banned. So there's only so much we can kind of see and test. We can kind of just observe the data that we get through the API, and then we talk to our users and try to understand what's happening. But like, depending on what country you're in, you may have the ability to list in like publish listings in currencies that are kind of not your native currency. So like, we see this in Canada a lot, where there didn't even used to be a Canadian eBay site. So we have a lot of users who have US eBay accounts. They live in Canada, but they may, because Canada's right next to the US, they may actually try to sell certain things in US dollars because, they can maybe reach a larger market that way. And so, you can actually, depending on what country you're in, you may be able to list, kind of publish listings in a different currency than your native currency. And then if somebody actually purchases that, then, eBay does some conversion where, okay, an American paid American dollars for this product you sold, but we're going to convert it into Canadian dollars before we transfer it into your account. Right. And so all that complexity is kind of exposed to us when we're ingesting all this data from the eBay API. And it's really important for us, like, the kind of constraint we've set within Flipwise is that we need all of your amounts in your store to be in the same currency so that we can add up. So we can add up and multiply and do basic math on your the financial data in your store. We can't do that if we have a mix of currencies.
Right.
And so as we're kind of ingesting data for all of our different users in different countries, we're kind of like enforcing that all currencies are in their kind of the currency that their store is configured to use. And so, eBay provides sometimes, and this is where it's just kind of confusing about when they do and don't do this, but sometimes they'll provide kind of conversion rate information for us in the API so that we can see, okay, this Canadian sold this product, they were paid American dollars, it was converted to Canadian dollars, and eBay basically provides often provides all the conversion rate information we need in order to convert all of the amounts that may be in different currencies into to the single currency that their store is configured to use.
Generally, I love the idea that we're international and that we're supporting folks who are selling on eBay in other countries. Mostly because there are Flipwise alternatives here in the US, but I don't think any of them work in other countries. I might be wrong about that, but I just know that there's a lot less options for folks in the UK and Australia, as an example, to have automated solutions to manage their books. And so it's really cool that we get to provide that, but it just adds certainly a level of complexity within the application to support other countries and other currencies, of course. But it also adds a level of business complexity to our business to operate in these other countries. And, for example, UK has VAT taxes, Canada has their own version of VAT taxes, which is effectively sales tax. And that, all of that world has just been crazy to learn and understand how to navigate. And frankly, we still don't really understand all of it yet and have not figured it all out yet. But just, it's great to be in other countries, but I think we underestimated the complexity that comes with it, both at the application level and just as a business. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, we were kind of just, when we first launched, we were just getting all this interest from people outside the US, and we just felt like, man, we don't want to be turning away these folks.
Right.
And so we sort of we pivoted a bit and rolled out international support without a full understanding of all the complexities involved, including GDPR and making sure we're adhering to different consumer privacy regulations in different countries. That ended up being a non-trivial project.
I forgot about that. We just have even on our marketing site, we have a ton of weird, weird solves for different privacy issues, since we are actively, marketing to customers in these other countries that have different privacy. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
I think the folks in Canada, Flipwise users in Canada and UK and Australia should be thankful that we didn't do our full research beforehand. I think if we would have known the complexities that we were going to face, we may have deferred that work until later. So, but hey, we've done it and it's great. We have a lot of users in those countries, and it's pretty awesome to be sort of impacting folks in a positive way outside of just the US. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. And I did remember that specific issue, this, and this is just getting really into the weeds, but this was a person, I think they live in Asia, but they have a UK eBay account, but they principally sell in US dollars. And so we have their store set to use US dollars, and that's how we imported them. And they've been doing fine. I remember we emailed with them when they first signed up and talked to them about how they used US dollars, and they were very happy to get onto Flipwise with that. But then we just randomly, Flipwise threw an error because they did list something in British pounds, one thing, and we weren't able to deal with it because the right conversion rate information wasn't there. So anyway, we kind of set up a system to make sure that when that happens for an existing user, if we just can't process some object in their eBay account, that we kind of record that and we notify the user and let them know in case they want to, that person could change the listing to be in US dollars instead. But we just don't want that. The priority was we didn't want any data to get lost, we can't process, we don't want to import this thing because it's in the wrong currency, and we don't want it just to get lost and for that to be disappeared from the seller's perspective. So we're making sure we're kind of recording that, and we have a good audit trail, and we let the user know in the unlikely event that happens. So most of our international users we have no problems with. These are very edge case situations we're talking about.
certainly an edge case to have someone in Asia selling on the UK eBay,
Yeah.
just definitely in US dollars. Like
In
that's
US
like
dollars.
a trifecta there, trifecta of edge cases.
I know.
That we don't run. And like, that's also like, even outside of the complexities of the application, like it's interesting because, being like, technically anyone in the world can use Flipwise if you sell on one of the eBay sites that we support, which is UK, Canada, the US, and Australia. And so, but what's really interesting is that, we'll have somebody in like, I don't know, the United Arab Emirates sign up because they sell on, the ebay.co.uk. And all of a sudden we're doing business, in the Middle East. And we have to then all of a sudden be like aware of our sales tax burden there. And it's just like, it's a weird situation to all of a sudden be like, oh, okay, now we have to suddenly worry about, we have another, what's that really small country in like, in Europe? I can't remember. We have
Malta?
Malta, right? Yeah, we have one user in Malta, so all of a sudden we have to like adhere to EU privacy laws and EU like duty taxes and all these things. It's just crazy. I just wasn't expecting to have to deal with all that, but that's I don't know. It's been fun.
It has been fun, and it's so rewarding. Like in our Discord, we have different channels set up for the different countries we support, and it's just so fun to have people from all over the world using Flipwise.
It's very cool it's cool to like be able, like when we're troubleshooting problems for someone in the UK, to pop into Flipwise and see like everything represented as British pounds. Like, oh yeah, it's cool. I forgot that it works this way. It's very cool.
And they have different terms. Like instead of garage sales, they have like car boot sales.
Boot sales. Yep.
Boot sales.
That's right.
That's pretty funny.
That's right. Yeah. Well, let's see. We also, outside of the international fun stuff that we worked on this week, we also had some of the scheduled listing work as well, which this work we'd been sort of earmarked to do for a while, but hadn't got a chance to do it. And I think we were surprised at our findings once we implemented this work and then tested it. And basically, I think the gist of the issue is that eBay treated scheduled listings just different than other listings, than active listings. And therefore, there was just differences in how Flipwise received information from eBay about scheduled listings. And this is sort of similar to drafts. And so drafts are just like not available in the eBay API, which is really unfortunate because it would have been really nice to be able to ingest drafts into Flipwise so that people could assign their acquisition data to those drafts and then, later publish them. But they just don't make drafts available in the API. They do make scheduled listings available in the API, but historically, the way that they were made available was just different. They didn't send us notifications when things changed. We sort of knew when somebody created a scheduled listing, but if they then changed the publish time or if they changed the title, Flipwise wouldn't know until it actually went live. It just caused all these weird issues. So this week we sat down to actually like fix that stuff. And what we ended up doing is, well, gosh, we're really going to open up a can of worms talking about this. But maybe you could talk just about like eBay's notification system and its API and how we utilize both of those to power Flipwise. You want to dive into that?
For sure. So we, I guess it's the difference between kind of like push and pull. So they have, eBay has several different APIs we use when we want to fetch, a good example is when a user first signs up for Flipwise, we need to do like a one-time historical import of all of their data. And so we leverage several different of their APIs to fetch all their listings, all their orders, their transactions, their returns, seller fees, all that kinds of stuff. And so in those cases, we're kind of like pulling from the eBay API. But in order to stay in sync with Flipwise, we do pull, but it's better to have, or what eBay has set up is a kind of a notification system so that they can push updates to us. Right. And the advantages so like if you list something, if you make a sale, et cetera, eBay sends us a notification to let us know that happened. And in theory, the advantage to that system is that, we find out about changes instantly as opposed to like polling on some interval. So our users, will instantly see updates reflected in Flipwise when stuff happens on eBay, which is great. And eBay kind of imposes like rate limits on how often we can pull from their API. And so instead of us like constantly checking an API, hey, has something changed? Hey, has something changed? Like we can make fewer API calls by listening to eBay notifications and finding out about changes that way. So that's at a high level kind of like how we use those two systems. And in theory, that is awesome, but in practice, there's just some, I guess the major issues with the notification system are, one, like with the scheduled listings example you mentioned, there's certain like events we need to be aware of that notifications aren't sent for. And so we need to basically set up some other way of finding out about those things. And then the second issue is that even for the notifications that are sent by that system, the system can be a little bit unreliable, where sometimes notifications show up late, or sometimes they don't show up at all. And so, 95% of the time, it's awesome, it works great. Flipwise is just instantly in sync with eBay. But during that 5% of the time where there are problems with the notification system, Flipwise feels broken, and we get a bunch of support requests, and it's really frustrating for us and our users.
Yeah, and so that's like, when we first sat down and started building out Flipwise and learning about the eBay API and the eBay notification system, I remember being like, oh, sweet, they have this whole notification system. Like, we don't have to hit their API very frequently. We can just rely on these notifications. But it didn't take too long to figure out what you said, which is that the notification system is great 95% of the time, but the 5% of the time where it's not, from our perspective, it just made Flipwise look broken. And so we had to figure out a way to not rely solely on the notification system. And so, what we ended up building ultimately is that, again, we ingest and process, millions of notifications per month, maybe more, I don't know, from all of our Flipwise users coming from eBay. And vast majority of the time, that is how data gets updated the quickest, is by those notifications. But in the background, what we ended up doing is creating sort of a background sync job that when we detect that a Flipwise user is active on Flipwise, we then start pulling the eBay API at pretty quick intervals, so that in case the notification system is broken or delayed, Flipwise still has fresh information. And so we didn't want to have that sync running. We used to have it running, I think, like for all users every 6 hours or something. So the freshness of data on Flipwise could be delayed up to 6 hours if there were notification problems. And you can imagine why that was challenging, because sometimes there were notification problems and people would come to us and be like, hey, Flipwise is broken. And we're like, well, actually, the notification system's broken. But, our users, rightfully so, don't care about that. Yeah. They just want the data to be updated. And so we ended up kind of changing that background sync job. Instead of running for everyone every 6 hours, it runs every 3 minutes right now. Is that right?
That's correct. If you have an active session, we're polling every 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that is background context to the scheduled listing changes that we made before, because historically scheduled listings, we did not get notifications about them. We got notifications about them when they were created. So we knew when a scheduled listing was created, but if a scheduled listing was updated or changed, we would not get a notification. And scheduled listings were not captured as a part of those background sync jobs. And so what would end up happening is somebody would post a scheduled listing, and if they did nothing else and just let it go live, everything is fine. But if they would, for example, change the date or time that the scheduled listing would go live before it goes live, then Flipwise would not know, and it would think it actually went live at the previous time, and it would just cause all these weird issues. So this week we sat down to make the scheduled listings be captured by that background sync job, which I think we did, and we started testing it and all seemed good. But in that testing, we then realized that at some point, since in the last, I would say 6 months or so, eBay actually did either fix or modify their notification system to include changes to scheduled listings. And so I think that's probably why we just stopped getting reports of this bug, is that unbeknownst to us in the background, eBay kind of fixed the notification system to include changes to scheduled listings. And so the work we did this week probably ended up having less of an impact. It's good to do. It's good to have that in the background sync jobs as well. But it was just funny because, we actually checked the eBay API documentation and notification system updates to see if there was any news that they had done this, and couldn't find any evidence of them actually doing it, but it definitely seems like the case that they added that recently. So,
yeah. I mean, you reminded me that, we've done a few phone calls or conference calls with eBay in recent months, and you kind of reminded me that they are nice enough to invite us to talk to a few of their engineers and give us feedback on our experience building on eBay. And the top of the list of our feedback was like, hey, we need to know when scheduled listings are updated.
Yeah.
We need to get a notification about that. And so perhaps they fixed this in response to our feedback. I'm sure we're not the only ones who have reported this.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were trying to test our redundant sync system, and we're having trouble testing it because we actually were getting the notifications for these changes when we didn't expect to get them. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it's good that both systems work now with scheduled listings.
Yeah.
Like really, our users shouldn't have synchronization issues with scheduled listings anymore, because we should get the notification. If we don't, then our redundant sync system should catch it instead.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's exactly what I tested yesterday. I made a bunch of scheduled listings, and then we disabled notifications in Flipwise for my store, and just to make sure that background sync job would pick up those changes, and it worked great. So
yeah,
pretty sweet. Let's see. We also tackled a storage location bug. This was a weird one. We got this one submitted, and maybe talking just a little bit about how we handle bugs. This one I wouldn't consider necessarily like a super high priority bug. I mean, we definitely, there are certain types of bugs when we find out about them, it's sort of like a drop everything and fix. This was not one of those things. If it were something that was impacting like calculations or totals, we typically, it doesn't matter what we're doing, we prioritize that and fix it right away. This one was just a weird, I actually can't even remember exactly what it was. Do you remember, Lovett? I know it was storage location related, but
yeah, it was related to, so when you're viewing a storage location in Flipwise, we just tell you information about how many products are stored there. If you have multi-quantity products stored there, how many units you have there. And this was just an good old-fashioned bug. It had nothing to do with eBay. It was just a Flipwise bug. Yeah. But the counts that we were storing for that storage location, a user reported that she was seeing incorrect counts. Like she had 0 items stored there, and it was reporting that she had 1 product stored there. And it had to do with it's kind of, so when a product kind of moves through its life cycle, you purchase it, you store it, and then you sell it and you ship it. Once you ship a product, we remove it from the storage location because you don't have that product anymore. It doesn't make sense for it to still be there. It still kind of exists in your inventory in terms of being in Flipwise. You can go view that product, but we pull it out of the storage location, so we're not kind of incorrectly telling you about things that aren't actually stored there. And so basically, when that would happen, if a product was, or when a product was shipped, we were removing it from the storage location, but we weren't actually updating that count. And so the count would eventually get updated later if you added something back to the storage location, or if you remove something from it, the count would eventually kind of correct itself. But in this case, the very last product the user had in their storage location was sold and it shipped, and then it was removed from the location, but the count was stuck at 1. And so anyway, we corrected the bug so that these counts are always correct now.
Yeah, that's good. I think, I'm glad someone else noticed that bug. It's not surprising that went so long without being noticed. It's pretty edge case, I think. And, for the most part, the way I utilize storage locations is when something sells, Flipwise tells me where it's located, and I go and grab it, and everything works great. I don't do I've done some like inventory management, which it's actually a pretty fun process. Like you pull up your storage location page in Flipwise, it shows you a picture of everything that's located in that storage location, and then you can go to that storage location and compare the two. It's pretty fun actually, but I still don't think I would have caught that bug had I been doing that, but I'm glad we got that one fixed, and glad those are working well. Yep. We also worked on relists this week as well, which, gosh, we're already almost a half hour into this podcast, and I think we could talk for hours about relists and some of the fun and interesting challenges that come with trying to maintain a good experience in Flipwise when it comes to relists. And maybe we can just talk a little bit about it. But I think, kind of like big picture context, when you list something on eBay, it's very common that sellers end that listing and relist it, just as a way to sort of freshen that listing up in the eyes of the algorithm. And so we really wanted to support that in Flipwise. It would not make sense if every new listing was a new product in Flipwise and you had to re-enter your acquisition data every single time you entered and relisted something. We wanted to maintain a connection for the same product for all listings that it may have. And in theory, that's like pretty simple because eBay actually does create a parent-child relationship when you click sell similar or relist. So if you have a listing for a mug and you end that listing and then you click sell similar or you click relist for that new listing, eBay makes a parent-child relationship back to that original listing. And we use that to reference. We say, okay, so this mug was already listed. It was connected to this original one. And so we use that to maintain the connection between both listings for the same mug. So you don't have to re-enter your acquisition data. And you can see on your timeline in Flipwise that this thing was ended on this date, relisted on this date. It's pretty cool. Works great 99% of the time. It's that 1% that has taken up so much time and effort for us to get right. And it really comes down to us it being, maybe impossible to be correct 100% of the time to understand the intent of our users. And so when you click when you click sell similar on a listing, we have built just a robust set of rules that Flipwise then goes through to make a decision as to whether you're relisting the same item or you're listing a brand new item. And there are all sorts of conditions that it considers and thinks about when you do that. And again, 99% of the time it gets it right and it works great and it feels like magic. But that 1% of the time, it's really, really difficult to get right. And I'm trying to think what did we actually do this week? I think didn't we change some of the rules around when returns and cancellations? Was that the focus this week?
Yeah, that's right. That was the issue we were dealing with this week. We've been getting reports from users who, they sold an item, it was returned, and they relisted it, and Flipwise was not kind of respecting the relist relationship. Flipwise was thinking, hey, you're actually listing a new product, when really you were relisting the product you had sold and had returned previously. And so we revisited we have a giant spreadsheet full of these rules. We revisited it, and the rules previously would, and this was true for both returns and cancellations, where we would only treat it, we would only kind of respect the relist relationship. We would only assume that you're kind of relisting an existing product versus creating a new product if the title and the image on the new listing were identical to the ones on the previous listing. And this week we kind of revisited the rules. We looked at a lot of different support requests that had come in about this, and we decided that it's safer to assume in all cases that if you're relisting a return or a cancellation, that you are kind of relisting an existing product as opposed to creating a new one. Even if you tweak the title, even if you tweak the image, it kind of just makes sense. You had this thing returned or you had an order that was canceled. It makes sense that most of the time the next logical step is that you list it again for sale.
Yep. And I think the main reason why we were getting these false splits when you sold something and it got returned and then you relisted it and it would show up as a new product in Flipwise. The main reason that was happening that we discovered is that our rules were forcing a split if the relist had a different title or a different image. And in theory, you're like, okay, that makes sense, because if you relist something and it has a different title or a different image, you're probably listing something different. But in the case of a return, often what was happening is you would sell something, let's say you sold a camera, and you didn't know that it didn't have some feature or that it was broken in some way or something to cause the return. You get it back and you want to relist it. You need to then sometimes take a different picture and say this has a flaw that I didn't know before that caused a return, or you have to change the title to reference the flaw. And so when that would happen, it would then split it into a separate product. And so now, when a return is relisted, even if the title and image is different, we respect the relationship and we keep it intact. And that's still probably going to cause some false relists when they should have been split. But Flipwise, just generally speaking, it has more intelligence around its ability to later split relists that have wrongly been relisted. And so for some of you all might have gotten an email from Flipwise saying like, hey, you listed this thing. Flipwise thought it was the same product. It is now later determined that it's not the same product, and now it's split it for you. That's like that intelligence that I'm talking about there. And so we basically tweaked that behavior specific to refunds or returns and cancellations. But it's wild. Cause just even stepping outside of returns and cancellations, you would think that it would be a good signal if you relist an item, basically like, gosh, this is so hard to talk about in a way that makes sense. But there's so many complicated rules with regards to relist. Like if you click sell similar on anything except for your own ended listing, Flipwise is going to get it right. But if you are clicking sell similar or relist on one of your own items that is ended, meaning not active, then Flipwise has a difficult time understanding your intent. And again, and most of the time it's getting it right, but that's where the problem exists. And so we actually have a view in Flipwise that shows us all relists that have been made where someone clicked sell similar relist on one of their own ended items, and they changed the image and they changed the title. And again, you would think that would be a good signal to split those into separate products, but a vast majority of the time that's not true. That even in that situation, when you're clicking sell similar on an ended item and you change the image and you change the title, 95% of the time it should still be a relist, which is just sort of mind-blowing for me. But it's because, people are ending and relisting and making small tweaks. They're changing the photo or they're changing the title a little bit. So we can't use that as a strong signal to split it into a different product. So I don't know if we will ever get this 100% right, but I think with each iteration on the relist intelligence in Flipwise, it gets a percentage point better, Yeah.
It's interesting, like, the reason Flipwise has a tough time determining the seller's intent is because eBay doesn't know the seller's intent either,
right,
which is kind of just bizarre to me. Like, there are these two actions that a seller can take in eBay. One is identified as relist, and the other is called sell similar. And those are actually, they sound pretty clear. Like, it seems like, well, you'd use the relist if you were relisting the same product again, and you would use sell similar if you're listing a different product. But in practice, it seems like sellers just use those interchangeably. Yep. And do you know the history of this, Justin? Like, why is that? Why isn't there just kind of these two very specific actions you can take in eBay, and actually, why doesn't eBay put up the right guardrails so that one is used only for relisting and one is used only for selling similar?
It's a good question. I don't know all of it, but I can share some information that adds context to it. And one is that you can't, like, the sell similar function is only available when you're looking at someone else's listing, which makes sense. Like, you're selling one that's similar to the listing that you're looking at. It's only when you are looking at one of your own listings that the ability to relist is available. I can't confirm this, but I think historically clicking relist was different. Like, it just did something different. It actually just relisted the item, and it didn't create a new eBay item ID. And it just made it live again, and using everything from the past, from the previous one. It didn't actually create a new item. Clicking sell similar on your own listing would do that. But I think somewhere along the way over the past few years, eBay changed it. I can't confirm this, but this is my hunch, is that eBay changed it so that when you click relist on one of your own listings, it's going to create an entirely new eBay item ID. That I can confirm that. That definitely happens. If you have an ended listing or an active listing or whatever, any listing of your own, and you click relist on it, it does create a new eBay item ID. It's treated as a brand new thing. My hunch is that previously it didn't do that, and it used to work more the way you're talking about.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's weird.
It's really weird. And from our perspective, we don't know what's happening under the hood at eBay and their own code and database, but from observing from the outside, like as a developer, the data we have access to, the result of relisting versus selling similar are exactly the same. Like, a new listing gets created with a new item ID, and it has a property called relist parent ID that references back to the original listing.
Yeah.
And so it seems like as far as we can tell, the two actions are the same, even though they're called different things, which again is just really weird.
Yeah. A lot of weirdness going on in the eBay API. It's also just like, a very robust, and I say this in a nice way, but old API.
Yeah.
It's been around for a very long time, and you can tell in certain ways, I think. It's been fun and challenging to work with.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, for any old system like this, I'm sure there are very legitimate reasons for all the weirdness.
Yeah.
If we had an engineer here from eBay who'd been working on it for a decade plus, I'm sure they could explain it all to us in excruciating detail. And all these decisions would have made sense at the time. It's only now looking back where you're like, what? Why is it like this?
Yeah, when you have folks like us like diving in later and just trying to make sense of it, it may not make sense. But I agree. There's definitely a path there where all these decisions made sense.
Yeah.
Well, what do we have coming up? I think, we're about to sink our teeth into a much larger project around, I think we talked about this last week, but around income statements and tax reporting. And I think we just talked about it last week, but just more context on it. Income statement really will be functionality that we're working on. That's basically going to give you a complete picture of all revenue in and out of your business. Right now, we have like the insights page, which is kind of specific to sales performance and does not include certain things like ledger entries, for example. So the income statement is going to be really cool. It's just going to be like, hey, for any time period, tell me all money in and all money out and give me a breakdown of everything. And it's going to be really, really handy. And that, a version of that income statement we're also going to use for some more advanced tax reporting. Because right now, eBay or Flipwise has all the data to make it easy for you to file your taxes, but it doesn't present that data in the most friendly way. And so what this work will do is present that data in a friendly way, push button, just like, hey, generate a tax report for me so that I can hand it off to my CPA. And we're working with a CPA who specializes in working with resellers. And so they're helping us guide this work to be exactly what it needs to be. And super exciting. But there's a handful of projects that we're working on sort of as prerequisites to that. I think the first one is around canceled orders. I think we learned recently that there are scenarios where you can have a canceled order that actually results in a positive or negative net return, which previously we sort of just assumed that a cancellation would always result in a neutral, no impact to your net return, positive or negative. And I think I actually uncovered this scenario when I sold something, and I'm trying to think of the exact scenario. Oh, I know what it was. Like I sold something and the buyer, after I shipped it, was like, I don't want this anymore. And I was like, okay, well, I already shipped it. And they're like, well, I was like, you could just open up a return. And they said, no, they're just a jerk. And they're like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to refuse delivery. I'm like, okay, thank you. Because that just means that I wasted money to ship, and it's going to come back to me. And the buyer just basically, walks away scot-free on that. And so what I ended up doing, and I'm glad I did this because it helped us understand how eBay works in this way, in a way that we didn't before. But I could have either actually, I don't know. Could I have opened up a return on the behalf of, I don't know I'm not sure. But anyway, I ended up canceling the order. And I was just like, whatever, I'm going to cancel the order. It was free shipping. I don't think I had the option to give a partial refund. If I did, I might have kept the initial shipping costs, but I don't think I had that option. I think when you cancel, you have to give a full refund. I need to double check that. But either way, I gave a full refund. And so that meant that I now had the item back in my hands. It was a canceled order, and I had spent $6.09 or something on the shipping cost, but Flipwise was not showing that as a negative net return. And so that's where we're like, oh, okay. So previously we sort of assumed that canceled orders would always result in a neutral impact to net return. That's not the case. So we have to do that work. Did I explain all that correctly, by the way? Love it.
Yeah, no, that all sounds right. Yeah, Flipwise today just kind of does not look at canceled orders at all when computing your totals. And so now you found that specific example, which basically a counterexample. Like, okay, there are just weird edge cases where a cancel order can have an impact on net return. And then I think we did some basic querying to the database, and a very, very small percentage of canceled orders, would have an impact on net return. But it was enough where like, okay, canceled orders need to be treated more like returned orders in terms of like, how they're presented in Flipwise, and there needs to be more transparency around them, and they need to be included in all of your totals, included in insights, even if the vast majority of them are not going to have any impact on your totals.
Yeah, so we're digging into that work. There's another similar type project that we have to take up as well around charitable contributions. And so eBay lets you sort of select like, hey, when this thing sells, give 10% to this charity, which is a really cool feature. It's not used very much, but currently if you do select that and you do make a charitable contribution, Flipwise is not reflecting that charitable contribution as a deduction or as an expense as a part of that order. It just sort of ignores it. And so the work we'll do here will be so that Flipwise doesn't ignore it, and it does show that charitable contribution and treat it as a selling expense, something that reduces the net return, shows up, as an expense, so you can write that off on your taxes. And then also on your income statement will show up as like, oh, during this time period, I donated $150 total, through charitable contributions. So that's what we're doing. And then the third thing we have to do is what we're calling like floating transactions, which basically the way Flipwise works is that when it ingests expenses or revenues related to your store, it always expects that it's associated with an order. Is that right? Or a listing?
An order or a listing. That's right.
Yeah. And so, 99.9% of all revenue and expenses on eBay on your store are associated with an order or a listing. Like you might get charged an insertion fee when you list, and so we bring that in and associate it with the product. Or you might get charged final value fees when you sell something, or you will get charged final value fees when you sell something. We associate that with the order. But we have found that there are other transactions that happen that are not associated with orders at all. The most common one is if you subscribe to an eBay store. And so right now, we have access to that data. We don't do anything with it. It's sort of floating out there. And so what we're going to do with that one in particular is automatically show it in your ledger. We'll create a ledger entry for it when you're charged $9.99 a month or whatever you're paying for an eBay store fee. But we've learned also that there are other floating transactions that aren't that. I can't remember certain examples, but like if memory serves, it's like, it feels like they should be associated with an order or a listing, but for some reason aren't. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's the transaction. So eBay categorizes all the transactions that we fetch from their Finances API, and this one is of type adjustment. And adjustment transactions, it feels like they never have an order or a listing association, even though you would expect them to sometimes. Like, again, I think it's a specific example we found in your store, Justin, where you had purchased a shipping label, which of course had a order association. And then later there was an adjustment that you noticed in your eBay account where you got refunded some of that postage, but that adjustment transaction did not have an order ID on it. It's like we couldn't tie that back to the original order. So I think you like searched through your email and were able to kind of piece it together, what order that specific adjustment belonged to. And it's weird because we actually process a ton of shipping adjustments,
right?
But they, like 95% of those do have an order ID, and we're able to kind of tell the whole story for a specific product. You bought this label, and there was a return, and so you had to buy a return shipping label, and then maybe there was a correction because you overpaid in postage, and we're able to reflect that along in the product timeline as well. But there are certain circumstances, I don't really understand why, where eBay doesn't structure the transaction like that. They send it through it as an adjustment with no order association.
Right.
And so we're going to handle those the same way. We're just going to basically any transaction going forward that we ingest that has no order or listing association, we're going to pipe those into your Flipwise ledger. And then, so it's, I think we're excited about this. It feels like a good solution because it'll be totally transparent. If you're already keeping your general business expenses there, you'll be able to see, oh no, I've got these automatically populated transactions from eBay. Well, we're going to show you all the data that we can find about those transactions, any metadata we can extract from the API so that you can figure out what this thing was, And then you as the seller, if you know, hey, there was this shipping adjustment transaction, if you know what order and product that was associated with, you in the ledger can associate that adjustment transaction with the specific product so that, that expense is tied to that product and it kind of is correctly incorporated into the net return for that product.
Yeah, it's super weird. It's super weird that eBay, gives us what we need for, the vast majority of shipping adjustment transactions so that we can apply that. Because I'm sure you all have seen, when you look at one of your sales that has shipped out and had an adjustment, you'll see it pop up on the timeline showing you that you got money back or you lost more money because of the adjustment. But I was even shocked to learn as a part of this project, we were just like looking through the API and you're finding these you're finding these adjustment transactions associated with my store that I had no idea about, in any way. So I had to dig around through eBay transaction history for my account to be able to see, okay, this is something. But I think it's going to be really cool because people are getting charged this money and they don't know it from eBay unless you're keeping really close records. And I keep really close records and I didn't know it. So I think most people just don't know that this is happening, but they will be able to see that in Flipwise and have it reflected. I think it's going to be pretty important to have this sort of functionality there soon. So I'm pretty excited to work on it. It's just so crazy that these weird edge cases on eBay. Yeah,
it is crazy. Yeah, but it does kind of feel like all the projects we just talked about they're kind of just on the road to doing. They're kind of like I's we need to dot and T's we need to cross. Like a lot of these things a lot of these changes are not going to affect any users, or if it affects you, it may just affect you in a very small way on a small percentage of your orders. But still, it has to all be right, and we need to be able to present a complete financial picture to our sellers. And so, it's all just kind of on the road to doing this income statement work so that we can just confidently say that, hey, this is a true picture of the health of your reselling business. All expenses are represented, all income is represented, et cetera.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
All right. Well, we're closing in on an hour here. We're going to talk again in 2 weeks. And so we'll see what we get done in the next 2 weeks. You've got some travel coming up though, aren't you? Going to, where are you going?
I'm going to a conference in Toronto next week. It's Rails World. Flipwise is built on Ruby on Rails. It's a kind of popular web application framework. And I went to the same conference last year and I found it's kind of interesting doing the startup with you. There's no other engineers I'm working with. And so in the olden days, when I was, most of my history has been working on larger teams with lots of engineers, and there's plenty of people to kind of bounce ideas off of and learn from. But given that it's just the two of us, I find myself really kind of eager to go talk shop with other engineers. So get to learn the latest and greatest on Ruby on Rails, and also kind of talk to some other engineers about it.
Cool. Well, I hope you enjoy your time in Toronto, and we will be back in 2 weeks to talk about whatever else we happen to be able to get done over the previous 2 weeks. So appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
All right. Later, y'all.